My name is Robbie Park. I'm the president of the Tolkien Society of Kansas City. And today we're going to be talking about Tolkien in World War I. So I've got some notes up here I might reference occasionally. But there's a lot kind of to unpack in this title. So we call it Tolkien and the Legacy of World War I. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that, of course, Tolkien is sort of a product of his time. Whenever we look at authors, most in particular, I've seen people argue with Tolkien that, oh, well, you know that The Lord of the Rings is actually an allegory for World War I. And this is not true. And I am here to dispel that myth. Partially from Tolkien himself is going to talk about that. But that being said, a lot of what authors do and what they write is actually contextual, and that's what Tolkien says. Just to go ahead and kick it off right here in the foreword to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings. An author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience, but the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex, and attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. It is also false, though naturally attractive, when the lives of an author and critic have overlapped, to suppose that the movements of thought or the events of times common to both were necessarily the most powerful influences. One has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression. But as the years go by, it seems now often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914 was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. So Tolkien straight away sort of saying that it is not true that this is an allegory, and in fact, there's a lot of evidence if you read Tolkien's letters or any of the other works he did that he really didn't care for allegory in particular. But that being said, we really need to know more about the context of the time period and sort of what Tolkien's experiences were in World War I in order to better understand The Lord of the Rings as well as the other works that he did. So that's kind of what we're going to jump into and kind of a general overview of what we're going to do today. All right? So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to examine sort of the world that Tolkien was living in at the time. So this is a map of Europe in 1914 because, of course, it's very easy to get bogged down in sort of the modern perspective, which we are all in. So we've got to time travel a little bit for this presentation. So this is a map prior to the outbreak of war. And during this time, Tolkien was at school in Oxford. And I'm going to kind of gloss over his childhood. Very quickly, I will tell you that he was orphaned at an early age. His father died when he was 4. And his mother died when he was 12 from type 1 diabetes because insulin didn't exist yet. And so he had to work really hard in order to be able to get into school, was able to earn some scholarships, and was at Oxford working on languages whenever war broke out. Now during this time, it was actually quite common for any students who were at college to be able to welcome. Got so many more people coming in. This is great. We're going to be a full house today. During this time, it was actually possible if you were in Britain, if you were within a year of graduation, that you could sort of postpone your graduation, postpone your enlistment in order to graduate. So we're going to talk about that whenever we get kind of close to when Tolkien's going to enlist. So, Tolkien is at Oxford, and he's working on languages, and he's a part of this little secret society that he's created called the Tea Club and Barovian Society, and he has 4 friends, and of course there's Tolkien over there on the side. His friends Christopher Wiseman, G.B. Smith, and Robert Gilson. And these 4 men are going to become a very tight, very close brotherhood in many ways. They're going to be incredibly close. They're going to do all kinds of silly things. So the name Tea Club and Barovian Society, they like to go hang out at a department store called Barrow's Department Store and drink tea. It's very English, I think. Pardon me. It's very English.
With the crumpets.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, crumpets. Okay. Let's not get distracted. So it's very English, right? They go hang out and do this, drink tea, and in the process, they would also read poems to each other, original stories, and so this kind of became a great sort of writers group for these 4 men to share this information with each other. So these 4 guys are going to get really, really close. They'll play rugby together. They get up to shenanigans. All kinds of fun stuff. I'm not going to get too deep into it right now. But so they've got this little secret society. And so Tolkien's going to become very, very close with these 3 men. So incredibly close. And, of course, the war is going to break out. And here's a sample of one of the poems that he had. I'm not going to read this out loud, but this was published in Oxford Poetry, so Tolkien's going to continue to work on some of his poetry. and some short stories, things like that. He's still working on languages. Also, he started inventing languages when he was a kid, which is actually not that unusual if you know kids tend to make up their own words and do things like that. So it's not very unusual to do that. But he's really going to get into the grammar and be very interested in the philology of the language. So he has a poem that gets published in Oxford Poetry in 1915. And of course, at this point in 1915, the war has already been going on for almost a year, right? So the war broke out in 1914. So, as the war continues on, because as we all know, it was planned that it would end by Christmas. And that it didn't go so well. Like most wars, they always say it's going to end by Christmas, and it doesn't. So this is Tolkien right here. As time continues on, fewer and fewer men are going to be present on the campus, and it's going to become harder and harder to say, well, I will go to war when I graduate. I'm going to go. I'm going to enlist. You know, it's starting to become kind of a societal nightmare, as you might imagine, for a young man not to enlist and not to go to war. And so all four of these guys are really not interested in going to war. They want to be poets. They want to be authors, but they're going to have to enlist because this would be like committing social suicide not to go, right? Especially these poor healthy young men. So here's G.B. Smith right here, and then this is Tolkien. This is Christopher Wiseman, who's going to be in the Navy, and then we've got R.Q. Gilson over here. R.Q. Gilson actually is also quite a prolific poet and author. Some of his work has actually been put out since. So all four of these men are going to enlist, and one of the things that Tolkien does that's a little different, if you're not familiar with the PALs, does anybody here know about PALs? What is the PALs?
Yeah, basically, it was people from a certain area within a vicinity, or it could even be a family. A classic one was the King's,
Right.
King George V's, people that worked for him on his estates all went off to war together. Yeah, to
Yes.
Turkey. And they were like known as the PALs.
Yes, exactly, thank you.
Or buddies, we would say over here, maybe buddies.
Do PALs, okay.
Yeah, pals.
I'm all right with PALs if you're all right.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, perfect, thank you for that wonderful description. So Tolkien's going to join up with a third Salford PALs. And so on the outside, this seems like a good idea. So the British military could recruit people from one area, and so you could go join up with your family, your best friend, whoever you liked. They're in your town, and then you be deployed together, right? So it seems like a good idea. You're kind of building rapport. People already know each other. They feel safe knowing people from their own town. The problem is when they could be completely obliterated, and an entire town could basically disappear overnight in one battle. If you had, 500 men all from the same tiny village in England, all killed in the Somme, for example. So Tolkien's going to sign up with the PALs because, again, he feels probably more comfortable to do that. And this is a picture just from the Salford Battalion. And he's going to be deployed. And before he's deployed, he is going to marry his girlfriend. His name's Edith Brad. They get engaged, and then they get married right before he goes. And even when he's leaving to go to the continent, he feels very much like this is a death sentence. Like that him being deployed to the continent is a death sentence. But go he will nonetheless. And there's a lot of his letters that exist from this time. That some of them have been published in the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, which was compiled by Humphrey Carpenter and with some assistance from Christopher Tolkien, which are excellent, really great read. If you're interested in World War I, I'd really recommend his letters for sure. And so Tolkien is deployed, and so are his three friends. And so this is just an image of a man sitting in not quite a dugout, but he's there in a trench probably on the parapet. And it says, months of boredom punctuated by moments of terror. And this was very typical, where in World War I, you might be stuck in a trench for months and months, and nothing happens, and then all of a sudden shells just start going off for 48 straight hours. It depends. You could also sit in one of the rear trenches and then be deployed to the front, of course, and then the front's going to see much more action. A trench could be retaken, and then it could be taken again by the enemy. It's just an absolutely bizarre series of events in many ways. And so Tolkien is actually doing what this gentleman's doing here. He's writing a lot of letters. Paper is in short supply. So sometimes he has to lift paper from musicians in particular. He steals music paper and starts writing on the back of it. And he's writing letters to his friends, and he even creates this system so that he can communicate with his wife of like dots. He creates his own language to speak back and forth with her to let her know where he is, because he's in France. All right, he's been deployed to France on the Western Front. And in the meantime, he also continues to write letters back and forth with his friends. So, he is eventually going to end up in the Somme, and of course, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So did he say that, moments of terror?
Yes, months of boredom punctuated by moments of
And he
terror.
said
That is
that.
his quote from one of his letters, yeah, where he talked about his experiences in the church. Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's a great quote.
Yeah, sums it up really well.
I think I made a good choice putting it on this.
Yeah.
I feel confident about my choice. Thank you all. He's going to end up going into the Somme. Slide. And one thing I want to highlight, because I don't think this would be an issue for anybody here in the room, but if you notice the length of the battle, right? A lot of times people tend to look at battles and they think they're over in hours, they're over in a few days. A lot of the major battles of World War I took months. In some cases, like for example the siege of Gemisel, that might be over with, and then the enemy would come back and take it just a few weeks later. So you would think that the battle was over, and then it wasn't actually over. And so it just seems like an endless, nonstop battle and war, of course. So, Tolkien is going to be in the Somme. He's actually going to leave on June 27th. As you can see, the battle officially began on July 1st. He's going to leave and sort of be deployed on the 27th. Now, it is during this time. He knows that his other friends have been deployed, but he doesn't know where, because you're not supposed to talk about it, right? You don't talk about your position, you don't talk about what's going on, where you are. It's during this time that he's going to find out the worst possible news that he can, which is about his friend Robert Gilson. And this is a letter from Jeffrey Smith from his friend. So his friend G.D. Smith has sent him this letter, and he receives it. And it says, "My dear John Ronald, I saw in the paper this morning that Rob has been killed. I am safe, but what does that matter? Do please stick to me, you and Christopher. I am very tired and most frightfully depressed at this worst of news. Now one realizes in despair what the TCDS really was. Oh, my dear John Ronald, whatever are we going to do? Yours ever, GDS." And this is sort of the first real, I would say, kind of shattering, right? This kind of earth-shattering moment of, my God, one of my best friends is dead. He's dead, he's gone, right? And you have to keep in mind that we think of Tolkien now as sort of this old professor, like an Oxford Don, but he was about 21, 22 years old. So were his friends, right? Their early 20s. Think about how you felt when you were in your early 20s, that nothing is ever going to happen to you. It won't be you, right? It's never going to be you. It'll be someone else that I don't know. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be my friend. And here it is. It's happened, right? And understandably, he's depressed. He doesn't know what to think about this. What else? What can he do? Even he's stuck in the trenches. What can he do about this? Nothing. You know. And R.Q. Gilson will be buried in France somewhere, right? And even during this time, of course, as you probably are aware, during World War I, there were so many bodies. A lot of them were just thrown into mass graves, and that would be the end of it. And so he and Jeffrey Smith and Christopher Wiseman are going to continue to write letters, the three of them. And so, by the way, I should have mentioned, so Gilson was killed on the first day of the Somme. He was killed on July 1. So Tolkien was deployed June 27th. Gilson is killed July 1st. So only about 3.5 days later. Okay. So after this, on July 14th, I'm going to go back. July 14th, Tolkien is going to be sent into action with C Company into the Somme. And he's going to be in combat for over 60 straight hours. And he survives. Yay! So the only good news to come out of that, but he's going to make it for over 60 straight hours, being shelled and all this other stuff. And after the Somme is over, So the battle's going to be over. He's going to receive another letter from G.B. Smith, who's also still fighting in the trenches. And G.B. Smith has been writing back and forth with him, and it's going to be in late November. He's going to receive this letter, and it says, "My chief consolation is that if I am scuppered tonight, there will still be left a member of our school group to voice what I dreamed and what we all agreed upon. For the death of one of its members cannot, I am determined, dissolve the group. Death can make us loathsome and helpless as individuals, but it cannot put an end to the immortal form. May God bless you, my dear John Ronald, and may you say things I have tried to say long after I am not there to say them, if such be my lot." Within a few days of having written this letter on November 29th, Smith is going to be walking along on the road, and he's actually going to be thinking about, was on his way to a football game he was about to play, soccer for Americans. When a shell's going to explode next to him, and it's basically going to shred his leg, he's going to be infected with gangrene, he's going to die. And he dies on November 29th. So now it is just Tolkien and Christopher Wiseman, which if we go back, that's Wiseman right there. So now these two gentlemen, this is R.Q. Gilson, and then this is G.B. Smith right here, are gone. And this is obviously really tough for Tolkien to deal with two of his friends. So again, if we think back to that first quote that I read, all but one of my close friends were dead, right? It's him and Christopher Wiseman, and they both survived. They both survived the war. So on the one hand, great. On the other hand, you have survived, and this is sort of like living with survivor's guilt, right? Of why wasn't it you, or why was it your friend? And that's something that they're going to grapple with for the rest of their lives. Tolkien and Christopher Wiseman basically don't talk after they get back from the war, because what is there really to say? They continue to write letters, but in a lot of ways they kind of almost grow apart, but in a way that, like, when you have two men who have experienced something that they can't even talk about it, right? It's very, very different for them. So, Tolkien survives the war. How does he get out? Well, it is a good thing or a bad thing. He's going to contract trench fever. He's going to contract trench fever. And so these are some images, as you can tell from the World War I Museum. Over here is a soldier who's picking lice out of his uniform. And then we've got, these are showers to clean them off if they have the lice, and sort of it's actually called the delousing station. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with trench fever, but trench fever is a really, really difficult disease to deal with. So you're bitten by a flea or lice that are carrying the disease, and then you will experience sweats, shaking, chills, diarrhea, vomiting, that kind of stuff. But the problem with trench fever is that it comes back over and over again. So you may seem to be fine after a couple weeks of dealing with the symptoms, and months could go by, and it can actually come back. So Tolkien is going to contract this disease, which was incredibly common. And eventually, he's going to be sent back to England, and in that time, he's going to convalesce, of course, in the hospital, and he's never really going to quite get well enough to go back. And so, what do you do in the hospital in 1916, 1917? You watch a lot of TV, right? You watch a lot of TV. No, you write letters. You write letters, or you write, period. So Tolkien's going to be kind of working on his writing again and kind of going back to that. And eventually he's going to, the war's going to end, or will be over. And so the world will stop looking like this, and instead it will start looking like this. And it will change. The world will change forever. And the world has changed forever in more than one way. Right? Yes?
Can you toggle those real quick?
Absolutely. Sorry, I couldn't find an identical colored map for this, but it's got Austria-Hungary right there. And then boom. Right? It's quite different. And the world is quite different, not just in terms of geography, but it's also different in terms of the friends that he's lost, right? For a lot of men who came back to campuses at this time, especially even Oxford, the population could be depleted by as much as 85% of men who were on the campus. So you might go from seeing a very bustling, energetic campus to basically nobody being on the campus, because of course, if you remember, it was possible for women to be at colleges during this time, but just obviously not in the numbers that you would see men at colleges. So Tolkien goes back to Oxford. He's already graduated, but he's going to start working for Oxford eventually and will become that Oxford Don that I mentioned a few minutes ago. He's also going to be working on the Oxford English Dictionary, working on the letter W on words of Germanic origin. There we go. And there was never another war ever again. It was great. There was never another one after this. This was the war to end all wars. It was a great war because it meant that this would never happen again. They're not kicking the can 30 years down the road. So, Tolkien's going to go back to work at Oxford. Like I said, he will be taking up little jobs. So he starts off working for the OED, doing that, or doing words of Germanic origin. He will eventually be employed at Oxford, but he's desperate to bring in some money. And so him and his wife are, of course, having children. So he's got several mouths to feed. And so he decides he's going to start grading exams to help him bring in a little extra income, which is the most dreaded task. I am a teacher myself, and I do not care for grading exams. So